Hi everyone and welcome. Today we are joined by Dmitry Polyanskiy, the first deputy permanent representative of the Russian Federation to the United Nations. Welcome, Mr. Polyanskiy. It's always good to see you.
Thank, thank you, Glenn.
Uh,
Pleasure.
you have recently expressed concerns about the political stability in Moldova, and I guess many observers have, especially since the election. So I wanted to ask you, how do you see it? What has happened in Moldova over the past few years?
Well, it's difficult to say concisely what is there, and we don't want to meddle into the domestic affairs of this country. But we're very much worried with the political trend that is happening there. Actually, the country is now between two elections. They had a presidential election last year, which was, I would say, very doubtful to a lot of people because uh, the majority of the votes that Maya Sandu needed to get this to get elected were provided not from Moldova itself, but they were provided from abroad, and they were provided from abroad from the countries which were predictably more pro-European, and where the Moldovans living in this country, of course, will cast their vote for Maya Sandu. And in the countries like mine, for example, where is a big number of Moldovans and who were very much eager to vote, there was very scarce possibility to do it. And the embassy was the only polling station where they could cast their votes. So the numbers of possible votes against Maya Sandu was artificially limited. I wouldn't say that this is a democratic situation, and still she came, her lead came at a very knife edge, I would say, in a very knife edge way. So it was like fraction of percent. And this was also very doubtful. And given the fact that this country is divided, and it's very much divided, it used to be divided, it is still divided, almost 50-50 to those who would support better relations with the European Union and those who want closer ties with Russia. And of course, you need to take into consideration this kind of dichotomy that they have and give it a good political planning and try not to rock the boat too much. But on the contrary, what the ruling class is now trying to do, they try to kind of attack everything Russian. They try to attack opposition figures who speak for better ties with Russia ahead of parliamentary elections, which are scheduled. They're not scheduled yet, as far as I understand, but they are projected to take place either in summer or in autumn, sometime this close. So this, of course, electrifies the electoral situation in this country. This triggers divisions and protests. And we especially reacted to the fact when the leader of the autonomous Gagauzia region was arrested and detained for clearly political grounds. And she herself said, Mrs. Gutsul said that the reasons for her arrest were merely political. And we couldn't ignore this. We saw what turn situation could take if we ignore this kind of situation. So we raised this issue in the Security Council. We asked for closed meeting, closed consultations on the Security Council on this issue. And then I addressed the press afterwards, giving them the elements of our position. That's what we have. I know that Mrs. Gutsul is still detained. I think she's no longer in prison, but she's still under house arrest. And she herself wrote a letter to Secretary General Guterres, telling of what kind of a witch hunt is happening in her country, and that's why it's also very worrying, the whole trend. We don't think that it's good to prosecute opposition politicians in the way it is being done in Moldova, and this looms bad. This looms potential escalation of the situation in this part of Europe, and it is close to Ukraine, and there are a lot of people in Ukraine who want to destabilize situation in Moldova and who want to bring Moldova within this circle of uh, anti-Russian alliance, as they put it, and they want to kind of trigger some internal conflict in Moldova to punish all those who want good ties with Russia in the way Ukraine did itself in 2014. So they want the same drastic change in Moldovan politics. That's why, given all this, we believe that we had all the reasons to ring the alarm bell in the Security Council because of what's happening in this country and because of the consequences that can follow if we just turn a blind eye to what's happening in this country.
Well, similar concerns were expressed by Sergei Lavrov. He argued that in Moldova that domestically it's become an anti-Russian project in terms of marginalizing the opposition and yeah, he argued that it could become another Ukraine. Do you see this as a real possibility though, given that they have domestic issue and of course, as you mentioned, the Ukrainians on the other side? Do you think there's a real possibility of the war in Ukraine spreading into Moldova?
There is such a possibility. There were from the outset a lot of politicians, a lot of nationalists in Ukraine who were, eyeing the big ammunition resources that Moldova has from Soviet times. Especially, they have it in Transnistria, in a breakaway region of Moldova, which has a Russian military base traditionally from the days when the Soviet Union fell apart. So they were trying to get this under their control, and they of course didn't succeed to do it. And the only way to do it would be militarily to attack Moldova to kind of trigger some kind of internal conflict in this country, and then under the guise of this conflict to take control over this area. So there were a lot of plans like this, and people were voicing it quite openly. Now they are not voicing it, but we're afraid that these plans are still in their heads. And they also there is also another interest of Moldova itself in such a scenario, because, as I told you, the country is split 50 to 50, and as presidential elections, recent presidential elections showed, it's not only 50 to 50, but there are less now those inside Moldova, not outside Moldova, but inside Moldova, who really want to have European integration as a priority for the country at the expense of ties with Russia and at the expense of their identity. So it's very difficult to turn tables here without any, drastic political provocation. And this kind of provocation would be exactly triggering internal conflict and trying to punish those who are not, following the same ideas and who are not agreeing to this kind of direction of Moldovan politics. That's what, as I told you, that's what happened in Ukraine in 2014, when this coup d'etat that happened there triggered very bad things and internal civil war and actions like in Odessa in 2014 and a lot of other bad things. So this could be also very devastating for Moldova, and we really hope that Moldova will avoid this kind of scenario. But answering your question, some people in Ukraine would be very much interested in Moldova following the example of Ukraine.
Well, I guess it's not only that Moldova is divided, but we also have, of course, the making it much more complex, the breakaway region, the Transnistria or Pridnestrovia. Do you see any possibilities, though, there of a direct military attack by Ukraine or any instability by cutting it off energy or how? Again, 20 years ago, there was the Cossack Memorandum, which was sabotaged, but since then, we haven't really had any further real efforts at peace and integration. Do you see Transnistria as being the most vulnerable part where the war, like where they can actually have a direct military attack by Ukraine?
I wouldn't speculate right now about this kind of scenario, but we can't exclude anything. And again, there can be easily some kind of a provocation or a false flag operation somewhere in Moldovan soil with Transnistria being blamed for this with all the understandable consequences. So Ukrainians are masters of false flag operations, and they can easily implement this in Moldova, in Transnistria as well. So, and the tool of energy blackmail was already used against Transnistria at the beginning of this year. You know that when Ukraine decided to cut the deliveries of Russian gas to Europe completely, Transnistria was very vulnerable, and we found the plan B for bringing this very valuable resource to Transnistria. But Moldovan authorities were not cooperating, and it was very hard to push for this decision. We had a lot of strings to pull to get it happen, and it was not guaranteed at all. So it means that this energy blackmail is still in the toolbox of Moldovan and Ukrainian authorities when it comes to Transnistria. But Transnistrians are very resistant people, and they lived in such situation, as you rightly said, from 1991. So they are not ready to sacrifice their identity, their ideals, and the prospects of their ties with Russia for some kind of vague promises that some politicians are trying to give to this breakaway region. And actually, I think no politician in Moldova can ignore the fact that the country is divided almost 50 to 50. And the best solution for these kind of situations was actually discussed between Russia and European Union at some point. I remember I was part of this process, and it was in 2022-23 when we worked on the roadmaps for common spaces. One of them was common space of external security, and I recall quite well that in the preamble to this roadmap there was a clear indication, clear agreement between Russia and the EU that our neighbors shouldn't be put in a position of choice between Russia and European Union. And we were ready to stick to this understanding, which I think would have been a perfect solution for Ukraine, for example. And it could benefit both from good relations with Russia and good ties with European Union, provided they follow certain obvious economic and political rules. But EU at some point decided that it was not the rule book for him for this bloc, and they introduced Eastern Partnership instead of European neighborhood policy. And Eastern Partnership was not about Russia; it was about struggling with Russian clout in these countries and about trying to isolate Russia and to get it away from Europe. And that's when it all started. So if we could stick to this understanding at that moment, I think there would have been no problems in Moldova, no problems with Ukraine. And this status quo was quite beneficial for these countries. And now we look at Ukraine and we understand how much this country lost because of this absolutely Russophobic drive in the EU politics. And hopefully Moldova will be wise enough not to get into this trap.
Yeah, well, after the Cold War, when NATO and the EU began to expand, again, the main concern was that we're recreating the dividing lines of Europe, which we had in the Cold War. And yeah, I guess these countries who are stuck along the dividing lines between NATO and Russia now, which are also very divided society, as you correctly pointed out. So mainly Moldova, Georgia, Ukraine, of course. That was in 2005, wasn't the Common Spaces Agreement between the EU and Russia? Yeah, because I remember that agreement is said they should harmonize relations. One side should not pursue integration efforts at the expense of the other side. Again, it's difficult to argue that this agreement has been honored. But obviously, the failure to do so contributed to war in Ukraine, but also, possibly Moldova.
I think that,
Do you see
yeah,
the possibility
definitely.
of, sorry.
I just wanted to say that this understanding was very much undermined after the enlargement of European Union in 2004, when a number of Russophobic countries entered the EU, and they entered the EU with all their viruses and all the problems that they had in relations with Russia. I would say these problems were mostly psychological than practical. And our colleagues in Western Europe at this moment, they were reassuring us that the moment this country entered the European Union, their behavior will change because they will no longer be afraid of Russia. And there will be enough of reassurances from the core members of the EU in their regard. But it turned out to be quite the opposite because this virus, which was poured into the EU with the admittance of these countries as EU member states, it poisoned the whole of the EU. And we now see that the whole of the EU is speaking the same things as, for example, Baltic states or Poland were pronouncing 20 years ago. And that's why this project of roadmaps was undermined. And the European neighborhood policy was also a product of this drive that was explained by the EU enlargement in 2004. I think this is also a very important element that should be taken into consideration.
Yeah, I remember that was a key argument back in 2004 when the Baltic states joined the EU and NATO that the Russian minorities living in those countries, that the best reassurance that they would have get the basic rights, like being allowed to vote and work in
Never,
government,
never happened.
that
Never happened.
that the best reassurance would be if they could join the EU and NATO as democratic clubs. But again, 21 years later now, they still don't have these rights as citizens. So I guess. Yeah, it didn't really pan out as it was reassured. But of course, a key country also along this dividing lines between, in divided Europe would be Georgia. And we also saw, a few months now during the election that the Georgian prime minister, he warned that there were coup attempts to topple the Georgian government. So Georgia could be, in his words, in the words of the Prime Minister of Georgia, that Georgia would be converted and used as a second front against Russia. Do you think this situation has now calmed down, or is it normalized? How do you read the situation?
I don't think that it's normalized. We don't get much news, frankly, from Georgia at this moment, but I know that the situation is still very tense. And those forces who lost during the recent elections, they still want to get revenge, and they still try to mobilize the resources that they have. And I don't know how USAID's situation, the demolition of USAID influenced Georgia, in what way, hopefully in positive way. But still, there are still plans for overturning the authorities. A lot of oppositioners are not happy with what happened, and they want to continue the course of Mikhail Saakashvili. So the situation is far from over in Georgia, and the struggle is still continuing. But the Georgian government, turned out to be very wise people, and they clearly avoided, and it was uh, their choice, their premeditated choice, to avoid the fate of Ukraine, to avoid the situation with the Maidan, with all these things that happened in the aftermath, because a lot of people were trying to push Georgia along the same road as Ukraine was pushed in 2014. So they had the courage and the forces to resist, and they stayed away from the conflict in Ukraine. They stayed away from the appeals to somehow get involved in the situation after the special military operation of Russia against Ukraine started in 2022, which triggered immense criticism fierce criticism from Ukraine and from the West, and a lot of people really wanted a revenge against Georgian authorities. But they managed to kind of struggle with this. They keep quite good practical relations with Russia. There are direct flights between Moscow and Tbilisi. There are a lot of tourists. Georgians are coming to Russia. Russians are coming to Georgia. And I think that it's very good prerequisite for establishing good, practical, friendly, and mutually beneficial relations between our two countries, which we would very much welcome. There are, of course, hurdles in this way, quite obvious ones, and people will have to think out of the box to find a solution to them. But the general drive is very encouraging, and of course, it makes people in Europe and previously in the US, and I think some people are still very unsettled in the US because of this prospect, and they are trying to do their best to derail this process of gradual normalization between Russia and Georgia. But Georgian people clearly is interested in such a scenario in comparison to those who want to derail it.
Well, Mr. Polyanskiy, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it, as always. Thank you.
Thank you.